I'm really glad to have the opportunity tonight. I met Corey Gable here, good friend of mine, almost a year ago maybe at church. We both go to Good Shepherd up here, Lutheran Church at Shalimar on Meigs Drive, 1 Meigs Drive, I think. So similar address. And as we got to know each other, I found out he worked for NOAA. I'm like, wow, last year I was Tech Night Director and I was scrambling trying to figure out who could I invite to have somebody come over and talk to the club. Well, it didn't quite work out last year that I could do that. So when Frank became, he's like, you know anybody? Yeah, I know this guy. So fortunately now we have Corey here. Corey's worked for NOAA 24 years and is a, what is it? A biologist?
Fish biologist.
Fish biologist. I'd like to let him then give you a little bit more of his background and then kind of talk with us about what he'd like to do. I'm not sure if this thing works or not.
It doesn't matter, everyone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can y'all hear me over there?
There you go.
It's working.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Can you guys hear me over there?
Yeah, we can.
Just speaking like this?
Yeah.
You all right? I mean,
Not for us.
As long as the crowd keeps.
I'm just making sure. I mean, if I can, I can just, it's not like just stand here like an idiot.
There you go.
We say
I am a government employee, right? So, start out by asking a question. Do any of y'all remember the first time you ever ate, caught, you know, or fell in love with a red snapper? And I don't mean the red snapper that's down in the Caribbean or that thing on the West Coast that's actually a scorpion fish. I'm talking about Leginus campicanus up here in the north and around to Beaufort, North Carolina. Does anybody remember the first time?
Captain Melvin's, yeah. Sure. What year? How long ago?
You can share your story.
Oh no, oh God. First time, the guy that tried to hire me out of college came through Memphis and wanted to know if I liked to fish, and I said sure. He said he owned a boat down here. It happened to be one that Scotty owned for a while, that he bought from the guy that tried to hire me when I got out of college. Anyway, came down here and the guy that owned the boat at the time, his brother said, let's go fishing. We did, and we caught this, my wife caught a 12-pound red snapper.
I think the women always catch the big ones.
How many years ago was that?
That was about 2000, or that was around...
2,000 years ago.
Yeah, just right after you were born. And anyway, so...
60 years ago for me.
Yeah, it ended up in a walk and with ginger and some slits and, you know, anyway, it turned out great. But yeah, that was and 6 weeks later, my wife said, you know, I think we ought to buy a place down here. And then, you know, the greatest thing about that is that I'd say, you know, I need another fishing rod. She said, what do you think we ought to get? Anybody else got a wife like that? You know, there you go.
Well, for myself, my grandfather and great-grandfather were both born in Pensacola. And my grandfather had a place over here on Pensacola Beach before it got all the skyscrapers and all that kind of stuff. And, we would get in our boat. A lot of times he would put in over at Orange Beach, Alabama, where I'm originally from. And we'd motor all the way over here to Destin and get fuel so we can make the ride back. And Destin was a very different place back then, as you might have remembered. Heck, Destin was a different place 20 years ago, or 10 years ago. But I remembered it as the place with, you know, 2 red lights and 2 gas stations. When I came back over here about 8 years ago, and my colleague drove me over here to show me my area and where the docks were and what I was going to be doing, I thought we were still in Panama City. And I said, when did this become Disney World? Anyway, growing up as a kid, always wanted to be near the water and on the water. And when I didn't get in the Navy as an officer, or the Coast Guard as an officer, or whatever, I I went to college to become a marine biologist. And I finished at the University of West Alabama in 1998 with a degree in marine biology with a minor in marine biology. Studied under a man who's the dean there now named Dr. John McCall. And I spent two summers interning at Dolphin Island Sea Lab, right across the way here, working under a guy named, does anybody know Dr. Bob Shipp?
Heard of it.
He's wrote a book, y'all probably read, got some recipes, I think his wife put in there. I think his son's a chef over in Mobile. So back then, we were studying red snapper, and the red snapper fishery was in a lot different shape than it is now. But after I got done with college, the first job I got right out of college was working for NOAA as a full-time employee. I was very lucky, 22 years old, and was working as an observer on longline fishing vessels, pelagic longline fishing vessels in Hawaii.
Terrible.
And everybody said, well, I remember the guy telling me on the thing, the job's not exactly sitting on the back deck drinking Mai Tais. And it surely wasn't. They were U.S. flag fishing vessels. The trips were anywhere from 10 to 45 days. Most of the boats did not have heads or showers. They were Vietnamese or Korean captains with Micronesian crews. So a lot of them didn't speak English. And it was an interesting job. My primary mission on those boats was to tag sea turtles. Some of them I put satellite transmitters on. All of them were tagged for DNA, and we put cattle tags on their flippers. Should we recover them? And we have recovered a couple. The secondary mission was for marine mammals, and then also the fish themselves. I did a lot of research with the swordfish. I was pulling the otoliths out of swordfish, and I'll tell you about an otolith later if you haven't heard already. In fact, I'll give you all a few toward the end of the evening. After my time in Hawaii, well, in 3 years of my first 3 years, I spent exactly 365 days at sea. That was the nature of the job. After that, I got promoted. And the more you get promoted, the less time you spend at sea. But my next job was then, I left Hawaii after 5 years and was in the logbook program down in Miami, at the Miami lab. We call it the SEFSC, it's the Southeastern Fisheries Science Center. And I was in charge of all the bycatch data and of all the pelagic and reef fishes all the way up the East Coast and over to the border with Mexico. And then after about 3 years there, I fell in with the job. What I do now is I am a fishery reporting specialist, or port agent as they call me, in Port Arthur, Texas, which at that time was one of the top 10 ports for physical offloads of seafood in the entire country. Now, it wasn't as much as Dutch Harbor, Alaska by any means, but it was, about 7th, I think, is the highest we got in quantity of seafood. And almost all of that, I'd say at least 99.2% of it, is probably shrimp at that place. So, very different than here. But my boss knew that I had a lot of experience working with red snapper in college. And about 8 years ago, he said, hey, the gal over here, I don't know if y'all, do anybody know June Weeks? Lady named June Weeks.
Who?
June Weeks? Okay. She's retired now. She still works for us. She processes otoliths in our lab. But my boss had me transfer over here, and where I am the port agent in charge of the areas for Walton, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties. So, that being said, go over a little brief history of the red snapper fishery. Does anybody have an idea of how long we've been fishing red snapper here out of Destin?
I don't know, but Al said he caught his first one on a converted PT boat in 1963.
Civil War.
That's pretty good. Smacks have been going out of Destin fishing red snapper since the 1840s. Yeah. By the end of that century, we were already noticing that red snapper weights which had averaged around 10 pounds of fish for the year. The average catch was 10 pounds, was going below that. By about the 1930s, the fishery really picked up around here, and then after World War II, it increased exponentially. At the same time, in the 1960s through the 1990s, the shrimping industry in the Gulf of Mexico more than doubled its activity. And why is that important? Well, we found several things that have impacted the fishery. One, of course, is catching too many fish, but one of the others is shrimp mortality. One of the largest mortalities of red snapper is bycatch shrimp nets. The problem is the red snapper will swim into the net, and red snapper are reef fish. They like nice, calm water, and the water flow inside a net is 5 times lower than it is outside the net. And even though our mitigation factors, where we're forcing them to use what we call FRDs or BRDs, bycatch reduction devices, is basically a second hole. The first hole, have you ever heard of TEDs? Mm-hmm. Turtle excluder devices. So if you haven't, basically there's a screen to keep mortality of sea turtles down. Shrimpers are required, all of them, and on every net to carry a TED. And it's a metal bar. It's set at a 45-degree angle, between a 45 and a 50-degree angle, depending on what our measurements are for that area of the Gulf. And the sea turtle hits that, bounces off of it, and goes out a hole in the net. Now, shrimpers, of course, they've always argued, well, we lose shrimp when that happens. Well, true, but you're allowed to steal fish because you're not killing all sea turtles. Well, the same thing is happening with bycatch reduction devices. We put another hole in the net for the red snapper to go out of. And it's usually a soft membrane. They know to get it. But the problem with red snapper is, yes, it works, but red snapper, they'll swim out of the bird, as we call it, and then they swim right back in. Because they're like, oh, it's fast out here. I'm going to go back inside where it's nice and warm. So anyway, what do I do down at the docks? My main job is to collect fisheries information. I'm not just collecting on red snapper, I'm collecting on all the fisheries in the entire area. I also combine my work with FWC and colleges and other entities to try to collect all this information. Now, most of the recreational data, which is much harder to get, comes from FWC and some other samplers. My primary focus, myself and personally, is the commercial fishery. Now, I am responsible for bringing in that data, and then I send it up to my bosses, and then they take it to the regional headquarters in St. Pete, and then the St. Pete sends it up to Silver Spring, Maryland, and then Silver Spring, Maryland sends it over to the Department of Commerce, and that guy walks across the street to the White House. So that's who I ultimately work for, no matter who's in the office. So when I showed up, y'all were probably feeling a little bit like this whale. When you see me down at the docks, this area, we have 2 main dealers that take fish directly off the boats. One is Harbor Docks, and the other one is Aerial Seafood. Y'all know that guy. Anybody know David Krebs? Okay, he's over in Destin. He's off. He's not far from Sexton Seafood there, and he sells to them.
Up a mountain?
Yeah, Mountain Drive. That's right.
Yeah.
Right there. I would say probably 80% of David Krebs' business, he's the largest dealer in this area, is actually from out of area. And it's king mackerel that he brings in from Sebastian, Florida, and Venice, Louisiana. Most of the catch that comes into this port, whether it's Harbor Docks or Aerial Seafood, ends up out of state. It usually ends up at the New York Fish Market, and David Krebs has a big sale up in Montreal, Canada, of all places. So whenever you see this red snapper and all that come in, that's where it's really going. Now, yes, they do supply the seafood restaurants here, but the people in Destin do not eat enough red snapper to actually take up what they bring in. That being said, in 2020, commercial landings in the entire Gulf of Mexico was about 7-8 million pounds at a value of $31.5 million. Recreational fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico, and that combines at-hire vessels and private, is 14.9 million pounds for 2020. So if you do the math with that, and you start adding in guys selling you bait, fixing your boats, and all that, you know, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. So, one more note before I show you how to pull an otolith. Where the fishery is going at this point. We have, as of 2018, we have redesignated it from being overfished to, I think it is, yeah, it's overfished. There's overfish and overfishing. Do y'all know the difference? I know it's confusing. So let me look at my notes real quick. I have to look myself. A fishery can be overfished, but and overfishing at the same time. Yeah, does that make sense? No, of course not. It doesn't make sense to me either.
One's catching, one's
That's right.
pressure.
One is pressure and one is catching.
Now that makes sense.
One's pressure and one's what?
So the fishery itself has now been relabeled as of 2018 to rebuilding. So it's actually been upgraded. So hopefully in the next few years you're going to see these seasons are going to get longer and your catch rates are going to get higher. And as you get older. When the fishery started to collapse, what we were looking at was replacement. We call it fecundity, and we use all kinds of fancy words. But what we're looking at is the amount of viable, reproductively active females in a population. And we realized that there was so much overfishing and burden on the fishery that was around 2% every year was being replaced. And in order to have a sustainable fishery, we needed that at 26%, based on historical records and where we thought it was going to be. Now, as of 2018, that's now at 20%. So the fishery is considered overfished, but we're not overfishing anymore. Does that make sense now? So there's a bright future ahead for the fishery. Hopefully we'll keep going. Part of those mitigation factors have been with the shrimping industry. We've actually cut down the shrimping industry. I know that sounds horrible, but the numbers of commercial fishermen and commercial shrimpers have been brought down. In fact, to the point, I think we were trying to get them around 74%, and they're now below 67% of what they used to be. So if you're wondering, well, why is there more fishermen out there? I mean, I'm sure you get in your boat and you go out to sea, and you're going to see a lot more private guys out there than you used to. I mean, private fishermen for red snapper is, to me, it's anywhere from 5 to 6 times what it was just 10 years ago. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more popular fish. Everybody eats it. I mean, I love it. I mean, it's my favorite fish to eat. So, anyway, enough rambling on that. I'll save the rest for questions. You have any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question. There was and maybe you guys filled it out, there was a survey that NOAA asked recreational fishermen to fill out. What's that about, and when are we going to hear about it?
Yes, that's part of the data I'm collecting and others, so we can get a big picture of the fishery. And like I said, it's really hard to get recreational fishing information. We divided it into two sections of the fishery. 51% of the catch gets to go to the commercial guys, and 49% goes to the recreational guys. And then we combine at-hire boats and private guys. Now, then you asked me before, you're probably thinking in your head, well, we caught 14.9 million, they caught 7. That's true. And back in 2018, we did try to change those numbers to let the private guys catch more fish. And then a federal judge shut us down. So we got to stick with the plan for right now. Hopefully in a few years they'll relinquish, and then we'll be able to give the private guys.
What was the logic or illogic behind the judge's ruling on that?
There was pressure from the commercial fishery as well as some environmental groups on that. So Go
So
ahead.
I understand you're a commercial representative of NOAA.
No, I'm not a commercial representative.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you
represent
deal with
everybody. I
commercial
deal with
side.
all information.
All right, so help me understand this. How is it that charter boats, at least in the last 5 or 6 years, are able to have a longer season than the recreational guys?
Yeah.
Why can they go out at least a week earlier and stay a week later catching fish, where with me, with my license, if I get on their boat, I can go catch them, but I can't go catch them on my boat?
Correct.
What's the logic behind that?
Now, that falls into something we're also trying in the last few years. That is trying to give the states more say. That's a Florida rule on that one. If you
No,
go to
there's a
Alabama, it'll
federal
be
rule,
different.
too.
It's a federal law.
Yeah.
It doesn't make much sense. As part of that, we also allocate less percentage to at-hire guys than we do you guys. But the percentages don't make it. That was part of the deal that we had to increase the entire private.
So my only input on that to you would be, these boats that go out, the charter boats, they're much larger than we are, so they can go out in almost any type of weather. We're much smaller boats, so our season, if we have like a 30-day season, we might get to go for, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 days during that 30-day season, where the charter guys go twice a day at least. And day after day after day, starting a week early, going.
And some
at
of
least
them
a week and a
commercial
half later.
fish and have commercial burn and commercial fish during the winter.
So I'm just looking, so I'm just
But
looking.
they
for what's the
also, that's
logic-
their
what's the
living as
reason
well.
for that?
Well, that is part of it too, is that the idea behind it is that's their living and, you're doing it for fun. I know that it's a mentality that's in the industry.
So it's interesting, Don, certainly agree and to some extent. So years and years ago, I testified over in Panama City. Went over to whatever, we were gonna regulate, and I, we don't have data, and you guys rely on data. And I was told, you don't have data. The private guys, we go out there, we can't, I've looked at these guys, we all, some of us catch a lot of fish, we got sites, and we can do well, but most of us don't. The charter guys, they know the spots, they've got the places, they're yanking in fish all the time, and for me, I feel like it's weighted more toward the commercial guys than toward us.
Well,
But we
you're
don't
talking
like-
about at-hire guys as commercial guys. See, we don't consider at-hire guys as commercial guys in the quota numbers. They're combined with y'all's numbers.
Joey's
The at-hire
Joey's distinguishing
See,
between
there's
charter and commercial.
there's commercial fishermen who fish all year round on an IFQ.
Yeah, so
That's the
charter
way
guys, you
the,
think charter guys are not commercial guys?
no.
They're not selling
So what you got is, you've got two subgroups.
And
You've
maybe
got,
that's the problem. I mean, I don't know.
you have two subgroups of fishermen. What you have is you have you guys and you have at-hire or for-hire charter boats. And those are considered recreational fishermen. And they get 49% of the quota. And then you have full-on commercial boats, which are very different. We probably have 10 or 15 commercial boats in the whole area. And most of them, and we'll get into their gear here in a second. Back to, here's one offloading here. You might notice this. You ever seen down at, you ever walk around Harbor Walk?
Before you get that, just
Sure,
what I'd
go
like
ahead.
for you to do, and I don't want to keep harping on this.
No, it's
but
okay.
If you'll take this.
That's what I'm here
up-
for, right?
If you'll take this up and say, you know what, there is a difference between commercial and recreational, but you just said the charter guys are considered recreational.
Yes, in the numbers they
So
are.
we ought to be considered recreational as well and have the same season they have. They
correct.
shouldn't get a head start, they shouldn't get to go there.
That's what we've done
So
is,
if you would just pass that up the ranks, because
Absolutely.
right now, we're being discriminated.
well, that's what I said. You've got two subgroups within recreational, but they have separate quota systems.
Right.
And we have tried to change that system. And like I said, in 2018, it got shot down. Supposedly, the fishery will be, if everything stays status quo or, and we feel that we can maneuver some things around, let you guys catch more fish, because fishing does actually help the numbers increase. I mean, look at the private guys. You guys have increased exponentially over the last decade, much more than you were in the late 90s. And yet, the numbers keep going up. So is it you guys taking the fish out? No. I think it's the mitigation factors with the shrimpers and the commercial IFQ system. I mean, commercial guys who were making a living off red snapper, the guys I'm going to be talking about, the fishery in the late 90s got down to a 1-month season, and it was a derby fishery. And guys were out there killing each other to try to just catch fish to make a living. And who can make a living trying to fish 1 month out of a year? So a lot of guys left the fishery then. The new system is what we call an IFQ, an increased frequency quota. That's what it stands for. And what it's based on is their past catch history. And so if you're a commercial fisherman and you've caught so many red snapper over the time, we're going to compare you to everybody else in the fleet. And we say, okay, this is the maximum number of fish y'all can catch. So based on that, you caught X percentage. This is what we're going to allow for the year. And every January 1st, we allow these guys, we tell them what their number is. And then they have all year to catch it or not. They can even sell that quota to other boats. Because some boats, I've got guys that have 0 red snapper quota, just because historically they never caught them. So they have to go out and purchase that every year from another boat. And some boats, they get toward the end of the year, they'd rather paint their boat, put it up in dry dock. So I could make money just staying at home. It's rare, but it does happen. And then there's fish dealers who own shares of quota historically. They don't even have boats anymore, but they just sell it out to fishermen. Stuff like that happens all the time. But it's been a lot better for the fishermen, the commercial guys, because they can fish year-round, put food on the table for their families. Go ahead.
Okay, just to kind of follow up on Don's point, and I think from our perspective, what we see is we are classified together with the foreign hire charter guys.
Absolutely.
But yet, they get a 1-week head start on recreational. And what happens with that is they go out on all the inshore, closer in, public reefs.
Every day.
and
2 to
just
3 trips.
race
And they're out there a week ahead, taking the snapper off the same reefs that you're headed for, even
Twice
though
a
they
day,
can run
at
it.
least twice a day.
So by
And that is the
time-
state of Florida there.
By that 1 week, we have to work a whole lot harder to find the snapper.
Absolutely.
And that's what we don't understand, is why they get that 1 week head start.
And we've been in negotiations the last few years. That is the big future of what we're trying to do with that, is negotiations with all the different states, because each state now has its own quota as well. Florida has a 44% quota, I think, for the Gulf. Some of the states.
44% quota?
Hmm?
Did you say 44?
44%. It's a little bit more, but it's 44% out of the Gulf of Mexico states. This is Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas.
Distributed to,
44% of the Gulf red snapper. Now, what we're talking about here is Gulf red snapper,
In state
Correct.
waters.
not South Atlantic red snapper, which is an absolute disaster.
Yeah, that's intense.
So we've actually closed that fishery in 2016, that year.
I don't think this actually are comments directed at NOAA. This is directed at local government, because the lobbyists are the ones who are saying those commercial fishermen need the head start because the net revenues for Okaloosa County are way exceeded based upon the tourism influx from the head start than it is on any personal.
But it's not so much the commercial.
It's not
you have the commercial.
No, I
versus
said charter, I didn't say
charter.
commercial,
Yeah,
I said
okay.
charter.
Okay.
So, and that is outside of NOAA's dominion, that is a state
Right,
regulation.
right, okay.
So our.
Yeah, each state sets its own red snapper season. They're just allowed, we say, okay, you're allowed a certain percentage, and trees keep it at 2 fish at 16. A few years ago, it was kind of funny, Texas, I lived in Texas for 8 years. There's a mentality there, they get 6%, but they like to think they, are a lot higher, and they tried to tell everybody that they were going, well, we need more than 2 fish. 2 fish is fine for those guys in Florida, but we need 2 fish. We need 4 fish in Texas. We're like, okay, but you got to go from 16 to 20 inches. Well, no, we're Texas. I was like, well,
It's gotta be bigger.
sorry.
Even though it's not only state, NOAA agreed, and the charter guys get to go in federal waters as
Right,
well.
so, we're not picking on you, believe me.
Hey,
But
I've
what
been
we're
here,
doing is
man.
we're voicing- and I'm
This is not my first rodeo. Go
All
ahead.
right, so I think what Scott is saying, he had a federal permit. you know.
Yeah, you guys are
But
nice.
what
I'm not,
they're doing,
nobody's
what
thrown
the
a
state-
shoe yet.
The state is working in conjunction, the state is working in conjunction with the federal government, so the
Correct.
SNAP regulations are the same. So we can't blame it on the state, it's like they're working together.
Absolutely.
So if you have any input, that's what we're saying, if you can pass this on.
Absolutely, and I will.
Thank you.
What's your name?
No, believe me, Biden already has my number. Already knows who I am. I mean, I'll tell my granddad. What's the name on the boat?
His boat's Barracuda.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he already knows who I am.
Phone number. I'm sorry, he had a question first.
I understand everything they're saying because I've been there, but the thing I don't understand is how you pull the metrics without knowing how many porpoises eat the ones that you throw back. Okay? I mean, I'm just sitting there, and every time I've ever gone out, if I catch one small, I'm like, I could eat this thing, or I can throw it back, and a porpoise can eat this thing.
And a lot of my
Okay?
commercial
And
guys
so
get sharked all the
How
time.
do
We do
you account for the metrics of how many fish are lost due to porpoises, sharks, or whatever when you throw the fish back? And now, everybody here loves to try to get the fish down. I mean, we used to sit there and throw a fish over here and throw a fish over here, hoping to get one down.
Y'all getting any hit by triggerfish as well? Yeah,
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, how do you account
I'm
for
hearing
that?
that a lot too.
How do you account for that?
Well, the only way we could is,
Yeah.
we have an
There's no
observer.
way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we do have observer programs, but it's very small for the red snapper fleet. I've in the last 5 years, of course, some of us, COVID is messing everything up. I don't want to use that as an excuse, though. That's true. I'm talking about 2 years ago.
You don't see anybody here.
The data will be skewed for that. That's a whole other story. The observers could bring that in, but I don't even think they're collecting that information. So
Well, I mean,
that's
it's
something to
gotta come
definitely
up,
send up
right?
the chain.
In all your little.
Absolutely, we pass that along all the time. I'm
Have you
hearing that a
really
lot.
considered that?
I have,
Of course,
because I hear it all the time.
You have an industry standard or a professional estimation of the survivability of a putback fish, right?
Somewhat.
You've got to be using something.
No.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. It's
Absolutely,
actually
yeah.
it's very hard to calculate that.
We only counting the fish that are brought in,
That's tough.
right?
Yeah, most of it.
Yeah.
Now we're still devising ways. His question is very good because we don't have a clear cut way to measure that.
But
That's
there's
the
an
answer.
there's no clear-cut way to measure much of what we're talking about, but you still
No,
have
I'm
to.
talking about fish, undersized fish is what you're talking about that you're throwing back,
Mortality.
or
Out of season.
out of season fish.
You don't have to go very far on Google to figure out that.
Well, I got
that
my
the
commercial
prevailing
guys.
wisdom is that 50% of what you put back doesn't live.
No, it's higher than that, 80.
We don't know. Is the
Yeah,
answer.
but it's easy to Google.
But you can
that
Google
data's gotta
anything.
come from
You
somewhere.
could Google and find out that
Right.
No, well,
There's
I'm
no
not-
war
I'm
in the
not-
Ukraine,
I'm not talking
but,
about
I mean,
Facebook. I'm saying
what's the reality?
That data is, that prevailing wisdom's been around for years.
it's one of those many things we're gonna have to work on. It is a problem.
So you're not gonna own anything, no kind of a NOAA estimate on the survivability of a putback.
I do not have that information.
And that's the problem.
Move on.
Show some teeth.
I can
Come on, guys.
add.
Slow down.
It's okay.
Hang on.
I think I can add to that. I mean, I've read the way that they actually, the formulas that are used, and there is a percentage for mortality for a snapper.
There's an estimated one, yes.
Yeah, and it's a number, and
It depends on the fishery.
I can't remember what it is.
I mean, I'll give you.
They do account, I'm not defending, but I'm just saying, they do account, y'all do account for mortality of red snapper.
To a degree, but it's not an exact science by any means. I would like something more solid. I would like to say, hey, if you, it's like, I worked in a spiny lobster fishery when I was in Hawaii. And we knew that any lobster that was thrown overboard, it was a live lobster fishery, any lobster, we let them keep 100% because we found out the mortality of dumping a live lobster overboard is 100%. So you might as well keep them. So, you know, I mean, they come in a ball, they hit that water, they go down, and once they do this, every fish on the reef goes, oh, you know, I mean, you hear the angels sing. So, so those guys were not making it. So, you know, you have something like that, we could say, okay, and then we can mitigate accordingly. You know, otherwise we have to mitigate with what we have.
So over the past few months, I've seen some reports in like Port Enforcement and that kind of thing that surveys have shown that there are actually significantly larger populations of red snapper that exist in standard bottom, you know, not associated with reefs, et cetera, and that there's a greater population of red snapper out there than has been, than we thought we had. Have you seen any of that, or can you comment on that?
I can't comment on where fishermen fish. I'm not allowed, it's a trade secret.
Well, I think.
So that falls into
That's
that.
not what he was saying.
I think it was actually a reasonably qualified scientific analysis of how many fish exist out there. Now, I can go back and look, and I'm happy to do that with you at some point in time and debate it, but I just wonder, you haven't seen it, you don't know about it, so obviously.
I know, all I can say is I know where they fish, and I can't tell you where they fish.
I think he's saying, though, there's reports that there's more fish out there than what you or NOAA or the government really recognize as being there.
Yeah, I've heard that argument before. I don't know. You'd have to be God almost to know the exact number.
I'll ask him tonight.
Yeah, we can only go with what, you'll see what my job is here in a few minutes, how I collect data in the commercial fishery. We'll get on. I just want to, and we'll answer more questions.
Just
one more.
Is there any scientific data on the effect of lionfish on the snapper population?
That is a good question. I don't know. I'd love to see them eradicated.
Well, that's
and I know they're tasty.
they're doing something bad.
And they're not from here.
Right.
We do have programs where we're watching out for them. That's about all it is.
But we don't know anything other of that.
Yeah.
That could be killed.
That and tiger prawns.
Yes.
So, supposedly tiger prawns are not breeding in the Gulf, but what, you know, there was only two. They were, yeah. Why are they so big? And you've seen them.
Exactly.
I've seen them. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Please, let's see your presentation.
Oh yeah. So you might recognize this. This is one of my offload points. A lot of times you ever see me working, I'm over at Harbor Docks or I'm behind Rotulas down in the cubby hole down there. You'll see me and my wife pick up and we'll be offloading a boat. I get every IFQ boat has to give me a 3-hour notification before they come in. It's all electronic. They just call it in, even if they're 3 sheets to the wind and 12 hours away. But they know when they're coming in, and if they're riding the trough, which they're not supposed to do. But coming in from Pensacola or wherever. Most of these guys. Let's see if I got an example of the gear. So here's the gear they're using. I don't know if y'all seen this. It's called bandit gear. So it's hydraulically run, but if if the hydraulics break, you can crank it yourself. They're going to put anywhere between 15 to 35 hooks on this and drop it down the reef. And I've got depth finders and fish finders and all that kind of stuff, and they work 24/7 when they're out there. And the average trip's anywhere from 3 to 7 days. We get a lot of questions from folks walking down Harbor Walk all the time. I get, the most popular one is, does red snapper taste a lot like walleye?
Hell no.
Yeah, I know. Well, my grandfather used to ask me, he had never had red snapper, if it tasted like catfish. I know.
What do they use for bait?
What do they use for bait? That's good. That's a trade secret. It's usually it's frozen fish. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
How deep do they normally go?
commercial rig right here? You sit on the
Yeah,
rig.
this is a commercial rig. This is commercial fisherman. I know this
Yeah,
guy.
but you got a 1,000-foot reef.
I
or-
pay taxes, you gotta tell me what kind of bait they use.
He pays taxes too, 4 times a year.
So he pays more than
He
I
does
do.
use some kind of mackerel.
So he
There you go.
35?
Hey, come on, let's let them do the.
He's good. Yeah, he can put 35
Come
on
on,
there.
guys, give him a break, let him move forward
No,
with
it's
his
all right.
presentation.
So, this is a typical day. These are already iced over. They're going to be doing layers of ice. This is this boat that I worked here this day. Some of them will get a plethora of fish. It depends on the boat. Some guys know where they are. Some guys, they're just they're feeding their habits and other things. And you get all types out there. This is a good boat, offloading with aerial. I think this day they brought in about 9,000 pounds, and they've been out a week. So, and they were tired. So this is what I'm doing while I'm out there. I've got my fish board here. I'll hold this up, everybody.
It'll be the first time I fell over.
So this is my new trinket. I used to use just an old oak plank with a meter board. Everything's in metric for me. The FWBSFC guys like to show up every now and then because we've started giving them a stipend to show up. And the more they show up, which I've only seen one in the last year, should be every time because the more they show up, the more money they'll get. But they'd rather be out in the woods checking on deer and harassing you guys out there and me than down there. But he does his all in inches. And he also measures his fish differently. I'm just doing a fork length is all I'm after. So what we're looking at is this is a magnet. It's an electronic board. I turn it on. I've got another magnet that I have on my finger here. I like the pink one. It makes me look real masculine while I'm out there. And I'm just doing the fork length. And everything's in millimeters. He's going to come out there and he's going to be looking for, the FWC guy is going to be looking for small red snapper. And if they have a certain percentage of undersized, then he starts writing tickets. Had one a few weeks ago get a ticket, but it was for life jackets. And of course, he'll also do like you guys. If you've ever been boarded, he'll pinch the tail and get a total length. So that's that 16 inches. So you're going to see, you might see some smaller fish, and you think, well, those don't look quite 16 inches, but he'll be pinching the tail. I do not do any enforcement whatsoever. I have an enforcement division. They can come down and they work independently with me, but I can't even write you a jaywalking ticket. So I'm just the science behind all of this. So we've got our fish on. And I've got a tablet here that this is Bluetooth to. You can see you definitely take better care of your equipment because you don't get as much fish slime on it. This being a government operation, this is not even waterproof. So during a rainstorm, no water at a dock, right, dealing with fish. Fish guts have ended up on here quite a few times and will future. It is what it is. I try to keep it dry when I'm working in the rain. I've worked in when there's tropical storms going on out here. So what I'm pulling out of these guys is an ear bone. Now, if it's a trigger fish, I'm not going to be able to, I have to somehow take a sample to age this fish or tell what reef it came off of or life history or whatever. This fish is gutted already, so I've got to tell a lot of information from this without messing up the fish for market. So for red snapper, I can get their otolith. For a trigger fish, it's a little harder to get the otolith, so I'll take that top spine, that first ray, and I can get that at the knuckle. I can carve it out, and it lays down little rings just like a tree. You've heard of dendrology, I think it's called. You count the rings of the tree, you know how old it is. Same thing with an otolith. I got some otoliths here. Pass them around. You can keep these, by the way. These are all from 2 to 3 year old fish. I don't think there's enough for everybody, but you take a look. These are all left-handed ones. There's one on each side. It starts growing in the ear from the day they're born and lays down a ring about every year, and also show the health of the fish. How healthy that fish is. That fish growing fast? Is it growing slow? And I can irradiate it. take it into a lab and radiate it, get a chemical composition, run through a mass spec or a gas chromatograph, and it'll give me an idea of what all the chemicals it's made out of and all that. And every reef around here has a different chemical signature. And I can get an idea, oh, that came off that reef and that reef and that reef. And then I can tell, oh, we got a lot of them coming off this reef, we got some coming off this reef, what can we do? Go ahead.
Is that public information?
No.
Good try.
So, I get my otolith, and I'm going to show you how to take one here. We got some going around the table, hopefully. I forgot where I was talking about.
Chemistry, the thing that comes out of the ear.
Yeah, the thing. Okay, so there's one on each side. I've got the machine set up at the lab to carve off the, because we got to flatten them out. We got to so we can get a good picture of the rings, get a good count, and so we got to set it up for the left-handed ones. And it's a lot easier to take them off the left hand because I'm right-handed and all this. So, I sometimes have pulled both sides. I only need one and a fork link. So, get up here. I'll have this hand will be free. This hand will be have a glove on it. All I use is a chisel and a pair of tweezers. A lot of guys will pull, will cut the heads off, slice the head in two. I'll get out of your way. When I worked with swordfish, they clean that fish completely. So I would saw it with a hacksaw and pull it out. And the otolith, you see those otoliths are 2-3 years old. An otolith on a fully grown 300 or 400 pound swordfish is about the size of a grain of rice. That's a lot of fun taking back to the lab because you drop one, it's like, oh well, These guys can get a little bit bigger. The real big ones, 20 pounders and whatnot, be about the size of your thumbnail. We'll see some pictures. So here I am. The first thing I'm going to do is ram my hand down in there around the gill rakers. We call these branchiosticles right here. I'm going to use my chisel. I use my chisel like a knife. I try to keep it as sharp as I can. It's as rusty as can be. A lot of time on the stone afterwards. And I separate the gill from the back of the skull here. So what I've done here, and I think did I skip a step? Yeah. So right here, I've already cleared it out. And what I'm looking at right here is the back of the skull. So you're looking at it like this on a human. You have otoliths in your head as well. They're not very big, and I don't plan on popping any out anytime soon.
Do they tell the same thing as they do in fish?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do not know that. I need to look that one up. Mine probably covered in earwax.
Move to the left a little bit, Craig.
Yeah, my bad. So what I've done here is I've popped a cavity. It's right there. I don't know if you can see. This is the otolith here. I've already knocked it out with the tweezer. So there's a cavity. I've popped it out, and I've used that tweezer, and it comes right out. And that's all I need to do. And the fish is completely viable. It goes back and it goes on ice and off to the market. There's my otolith.
What does that do?
Yeah, that's my question.
What does that do?
What purpose does it serve? I think it aids in hearing. It forms like an aid to the tympanum for hearing underwater.
So they actually will be attracted to some kind of sounds.
But it doesn't need it anymore, so.
Yeah.
He doesn't need it.
No, it doesn't. I've never moved one from a live one.
Be interesting.
Is that something you want us to collect from our catch?
Only if you're asked to later. I'm kind of surprised that they don't ask that. There are some programs that supposedly. Oh, okay.
No.
How long does it take you to get one out?
I can get one out in about
30-second
Yeah.
operation?
Yeah.
How long did the first one take you?
That's one, and then I got several more to go. And I'm doing this continuously while the fish are coming off.
How many fish will you do in a one offload?
Yeah,
Right now, what my boss wants me to do at this point is just pull out 30 every trip, and then after that I'm measuring fish, and if the triggerfish come up, I'm taking spines off those. Now the triggerfish right now for the commercial guys, the season might still be open. They're only allowed to bring in 12 fish every trip. They have to leave the rest. So, you know, just, what is it, 4 years ago, that was completely unregulated. NOAA's entire regulation book, I think in 1995, all federal fishery regulations was in a pamphlet. Now it's, I think, a 4-volume set. So,
Just out of curiosity, I mean, where did they come up with the numbers for, say, triggerfish? Because we all, as fishermen, say, dadgum triggers are back of the boat on them.
it's a good question. Supposedly the same place we get in the snapper numbers. Somebody did a survey. We do fishery surveys with our large vessels, and they're saying the numbers are depleted. And I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but gray triggerfish numbers are supposedly down. Now, that's not what my fishermen are saying. They're like, my red snapper are getting eaten on the way up now.
Exactly.
So, what I see and what the bigger picture people see, you know,
Might be a data lane.
could be that too. Could be a day. All I know is, I used to, you know, I'd measure a triggerfish every now and then. Now it's like, oh, I got to cut the spine. Spines are not as accurate as an otolith, but like I said, it's a lot easier and it's not destructive to the fish before it goes to market.
So what's the average age of the fish these catch?
Now this guy here, I had to guess. Whoops. He's probably 25 years old.
And how much is that fish weigh?
This one's probably 15 pounds.
25.
15.
Wow.
And 25 years old.
Yeah.
And Corey, you can tell by this thing how old he is?
Absolutely. So yeah, that's his otolith there. That was the first one I was pulling that day. So 29 more to go.
So on average.
The next thing we're going to do, even though these are gutted, a lot of times I'm going to see a lot of remnants of whatever the sex organs are. There's no sexual dimorphism in red snapper. This can cause a problem for fisheries management as well, because it's a lot easier if you say, oh, well, they're all gray instead of all this. We know they're all killing the males. But this is a female, you might see here. But I'm also doing this as a secondary measurement. Get as many of those as I can. Yeah, I know. I have to tell people I go and sex fish every day. Go ahead.
So you put this under a microscope and you can count how many?
Yeah, what we're going to do is
Non-binary.
we're actually going to fillet it down so we have it. It'll be real smooth because you can't really see all the rings right now. You might be able to see a few.
So you got the rings.
So you got the rings, and then we read them rings. We actually have a real fancy machine we just got in Panama City, and all the otoliths that come from all over the Gulf and the east coast of Florida come into Panama City. That's where all the otoliths are processed in our lab there. So we got a new fancy machine from Germany. I haven't any idea how much it costs. A lady got it to work with beeliners and mingos, but we're also running red snapper on it.
Is it a GC?
In the PC lab. It's Dillwood Beach Drive right off Thomas.
So the gas chromatograph, just a different one?
That's not the gas chromatograph. We have that further down the hallway. The one I'm thinking about just reads the rings a lot faster than, you know, we do have people that their job is, you know, look under a microscope and 1, 2, 3.
Whoops.
The oldest fish we ever got for a red snapper was just 3 years ago. And we estimate, because at a certain size the rings start to glom together, was 87 years old. Wow. That's the new record we have.
How big was that?
He was, yeah, he was close to 40.
So would you say a lot of the 20-pound fish, so you have these 20-pound fish, they're on the order of 15, 20 years old?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Probably older.
Yeah.
So there's that many fish out, I mean, it would seem that 20-pound fish that we're pulling out, it just isn't enough of them, you know, based on.
And that's our question. The thing is if you have a red snapper are sexually mature at 2 to 3 years, and I think it's I got the number here, how many million eggs they can be. So the bigger your fish you got, of course, the more eggs you're gonna have. Let's see.
Exponentially.
So, yeah, let's see, I got them here. Yeah, a 4-year-old snapper, which is about 3 pounds, 19 inches, is gonna be 3.5 million eggs. A 7-year-old fish is gonna be 26 inches or greater. 7 pounds is gonna be 45.5 million eggs.
Wow.
But if you had a 20-year-old fish plus, and it goes up even beyond that, is going to be 33 inches, 16 pounds plus, is going to be 123 million eggs. So it's,
One's busy.
to me, it's a lot like the successful rebound of the Maine lobster is a lot like red snapper. And what they've done, except for Massachusetts, but Maine has an outsized limit as well. Now, yeah, now will they do that with red snapper? I doubt it, because the fishery's rebounding as is. It's just going to take some time. But we saw in the biology that a Maine lobster, if you only have a handful of really big 6-pound girls sitting down, you know, the older a lobster gets, the deeper it goes. You know, she can redo the whole population herself. So.
Bitch.
That's what I'm saying.
Busy little bastard.
So this was the biggest rat snapper I got that day. This guy was over, he was probably about as old as me. So he was about 45 years old.
And how big was that one, Corey?
Now he was over 25. I think I threw him on the scale. Let's see, 800. He was over 850 millimeters. So
2.5.
He went the whole length of the stick, didn't he?
yeah, actually my stick only goes to 850. I had to get out my other one, which is a meter long.
The big stick?
The big stick. I had to get the big stick and then type it in. So I was like, well, they want to see this guy.
Put him back.
Yeah.
Not at that point.
What reef is he at again?
Yeah, good question.
Okay, some of those numbers again.
Club's not allowed to keep any fish over.
I'm also taking odorless from a lot of other things besides just red snapper. Mostly it's red snappers because that's the primary fish coming into this port. I do have a couple of long liners that go for yellow edge grouper and tilefish and whatnot. I'm sure y'all know what this guy is.
Lane.
They're good eating.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that because
I don't know where his eye went. Doesn't matter. They sell these under the wrong name. The guys at Ariel keep calling these black snappers.
No.
What'd you say?
Cabarrus.
It's a gray or a mangrove.
Mangrove.
I used to work with these guys down in the Dry Tortugas, actually. Went out there a few times. They were a lot smaller
That's a
there.
good eating right
They are good eating. Yeah, but they call these black snapper here. But there is a black, you already know there is a black snapper, and that ain't it.
The tail looks different.
This one might be one you don't get all that often.
Big-eyed twirl.
Good, all right, man, right on it. He nailed it.
It's a big-eyed twirl.
See, because we'll catch little ones at 800 feet.
Yeah.
The big eyes.
Some of these guys do fish below 200 every now and then, and they'll come back with some snowies. A couple of yellow edge every now and then, and yellow fin occasionally, grouper, and then of course a couple of these guys. Now, here's some sizes of otoliths to give you an idea. This was that real big one I pulled that day. It was about 40. This guy's probably around 30 years old, and this is a 2 to 3 year old. So you see, when they first get sexually active, they're growing pretty quick. And then it does slow down, but those rings get tighter as it gets older. But I can tell instantly, oh yeah, that's an older fish. And this one's going to be pretty, and you got to look at the thickness too, because the thickness is going to be, a 1/4 inch on this guy. So that gives you an idea. Those are inches instead of millimeters.
Will
Hey,
male
Corey,
live as long as
you had mentioned earlier about
It's about the same.
Each reef might have a particular chemical signature.
Yes.
What are the chemicals that are the most prominent that you look for to define that signature?
It's kind of funny. A lot of them are, your mercury level, selenium, stuff like that.
The bad stuff.
Yeah, bad stuff.
Really?
If it's not in number, I mean, if it was in numbers that were harmful, we'd do something about it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's not so bad.
But you could
I would
catch a
like to see the
fish.
numbers compared to
Does it have
years
to,
ago.
does it
though.
have to do with a natural reef or an artificial reef or those chemistry differences?
How to answer that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do we have the numbers for those reefs?
I don't have those right offhand.
I'm just saying.
So would that indicate that the red snapper are prone to staying on the same reef? for the
Red snapper
lifespan?
do usually, they will move somewhat. We kind of call them semi-migratory.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought.
They will move off some reefs. Usually it's over, whether it's food supply or pressure from, or overpopulation. That's a great thing if they're expanding. Like I was in the history of red snapper fisheries, what they call snapper banks and the western Gulf, those weren't even really discovered until the 1930s and 40s. So a lot of fishermen, I have one fisherman that tells me he can tell from the color of red snapper whether it came off a sandy bottom or a rock bottom. I don't know if that's 100% true. I'd like to believe it, but that'd make my job a lot easier too. Usually if it's a deeper fish, it's going to be redder. We have found that. I don't know if y'all are seeing anything. Are y'all seeing anything different from a sandy bottom versus a rock bottom? You know, because it has that dark red band across the back, and
Well, I've
it's
got,
almost a
like,
demarcation instead of like a light pink.
Different colored fish off of the same reef though.
Yeah.
That one could have moved from another one, yeah.
And by the way, who's catching snapper off the same?
I'm just happy to catch it too.
So don't they have a tendency to migrate in during the winter time and then go back out in the summertime?
Not so much. It's usually it's usually for the spring when they get all going for. I'm going to start seeing, especially toward June. I'm going to see a lot of gravid females, stuff like that.
Like we've dived, and when
It
you
might have
dive
more to
in
do with
springtime,
sex than it
you
does
see
with
a lot
temperature.
Of snapper in close, and then you dive the same reefs, later on in the summer. And maybe it's because everybody.
It's because the commercial guys caught them all.
I'm kind of curious too. Why is the season in June and July if that is the breeding season for the fish?
Well, by that time, most of them have expended their eggs by June, early June. And that's a state thing. Did I run out of? Yeah, I think I ran out there. So, questions?
Did the Deepwater Horizon, the stuff they sprayed with Deepwater Horizon, did you see anything like an impact on the fish?
They told me, I was in Port Arthur at that time, and we were doing active sampling throughout the Gulf. They said there was no impact over here. I don't see how you don't have an impact without all the stuff that ended up in the estuaries of Louisiana is the nursery of the entire Gulf. And so I think we had one or two hits on a red snapper in Louisiana, but supposedly it was very clean. There was no oil in anything here, and there wasn't oil in my area as far as getting into seafood. Now, what's the long-term impact of that? I don't know. The study it was funny. We were told that study was going to go on for an extended period of time, and then a week after the well got capped, the study was shut down.
I have one other question. Does the data that you collect for red snapper contribute to the bag limits and size limits for any other species?
Well, only for red snapper. The other data that I'm collecting, like you saw the lang snapper and the gag and all that, that's going to go right for that.
Okay.
I think if you're looking, a quick note, if you're looking for a future of what's going to be regulated next, I would suspect, and this is just my opinion, so don't quote me, that it would be beeliners. We have a lot of people working on beeliners. Beeliners, when you have these big red snapper, especially the bigger they get, that's about all they like to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're impacting two fisheries right there.
One more.
One more.
They haven't issued new federal permits for fishing since 2003. They just keep reselling the old ones between boats. Is that something that's ever gonna happen again?
Good question, I don't know.
Just real quick, does the fishery in the bay for bait fish and shrimp have any effect on the fishery for the snapper?
No.
I mean, the quality of the fishery here? Okay.
I also monitor a guy who fishes in the bay for mullet. You might have, I don't know if you've seen him. He trucks them in. But there is one guy who fishes for mullet. If you ever go up to Desi's, he's supplying them with mullet, fried mullet. Some people love it, some people hate it.
You're getting pretty near the end. What can I buy you to drink?
Well, first of all, I'd like to have an expression of appreciation for the bravery of this man to come here and talk with this group. Corey, thank you very much. I don't know if he'll come again, but we'll have to see.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you for your hospitality. It's been great.
Very much.